Tom Templar and Scott Black of Green Lung. Thank you and good afternoon.
Yeah, just about.
Yep.
Yes, it is wonderful to talk to you guys. I know we're still a little ways away from the arrival of the second album, but I'm happy to talk to you guys about it. And since in the several minutes while we were sorting out technical difficulties, you both mentioned Bloodstock. Let's talk about Bloodstock first. How was Bloodstock?
It's very surreal. We were offered that show 2 years ago, like just after Woodland Rights came out. Oh my god, my cat is causing havoc. Come on. We'd been waiting basically 2 years, not just 18 months, but 2 years, because this festival had been pushed back twice. And we'd been we wrote the new record. We've been practicing a lot, and it wasn't like we weren't a unit. We weren't all in different places. We were all in London, but it was super surreal to just go from 18 months of practicing in a small space to the biggest crowd probably we've ever played with, certainly in the UK, and just a totally packed out tent. And it's kind of that thing of like trying to remember how to do it live. Like this, you can get really, really tight in the practice space, but it's responding to that crowd and hearing everyone singing really was just like, it was pretty emotional. I'm not gonna lie. It was kind of.
I think that's valid. You don't have to be ashamed of emotions. You're allowed to feel things.
Yeah, we were feeling a lot of things. I mean, some of them were genuine feelings, and a lot of them were just goodies we'd taken. But that was a hell of a festival, and a very fitting way to sort of get back in the saddle, because we got about 5 shows at the beginning of September, which is sort of were going to be around the album release. Now we're sort of a little ahead of the album release, but I guess they're sort of transitional shows between Woodland Rights and Black Harvest, and it was just great to play the new songs live as well. There were 2 debuts of the 2 new singles. And they got the same sort of reception as everything else. So it was great in that sort of way too.
Right. So a little surreal, hard to gauge. Scott, anything? Any impressions of Bloodstock?
Just as Tom was saying, like I think in the back of your mind, you're always kind of worried if you've been away, trapped in your house for 18 months, that maybe everyone's forgotten about you a bit, or come to their senses and realized that maybe they don't like your band so much after all. But
you say that like it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just something that plays at the back of your mind. You're worried that if everyone's forgotten about you and the world moves on. But it was really affirming to kind of play that big tent and hear so many people singing the lyrics back and seeing that everyone's still very much in joining us on our rights.
It felt like when we did Woodland Rights, we got a ton of really great shows off the back of that, and then they all got put on ice. And like, that's one thing. And you think, when you're like coming up, I think it's really easy to worry about buzz and like whether you're the sort of band of the moment, and then 2 years later kind of like there are other bands or whatever. But it felt like very affirming, because I think everyone was just patient as fuck, and lots of people hadn't seen us before. I think in some ways we've gone from being like a small club band to a big club band in between, before and after lockdown,
while
and
not playing any clubs. Yes.
While not playing any clubs and not having that, there's something about playing live all the time that keeps you sort of growing in that space. So it's quite a big leap to go from, you were usually playing to sort of 500 people and then suddenly playing to like 4,000. It's like that's really interesting. And I think we got away with it, but it's going to take a few more shows like that to sort of really feel like we're like comfortable in that sort of space.
Right. Well, it's a different kind of audience engagement, right? On that level. I mean, the physical distance between the audiences is different. How many? It's the Sophie Lancaster 10. How many people does that hold?
I think it takes about. Someone said about 5,000 at max capacity. And
that's plenty.
Yeah, and that's it's really different. I don't know about you, Scott, but I find it like actually almost less nerve-wracking when the audience is that big and abstract, as opposed to sort of seeing the faces of people you know, or like other bands that you respect judging you in a small room. There's something about the anonymity that's quite freeing. It's quite, I could get used to it, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's nice. It's kind of like just one big homogeneous blob of people. But it's quite fun because it's always fun to kind of people watch a little bit when you're playing on stage, and so you can spot, you know, little individuals in that big crowd. I think my favorite moment was I spotted one guy and he was just like completely singing his head off. Or so I thought. I looked back and it turned out he was just doing a big yawn in the middle of one of our songs. And I was like, oh, okay.
Right.
That'll bring you back down to earth.
Yes, keeping you humble. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
You need that. You need that.
Yeah, totally.
You need like the passed out guy who's just leaning against the barrier just for support rather than actually being a mega fan.
Right. Was that guy there? That guy was there. Right?
Probably about 8 of that guy.
Yeah, I should think so. By Sunday, yeah, that guy was probably there. Yeah, that's fair. Tell me about going from Woodland Rights to Black Harvest, because, you know, in addition to the world, right, everything that's happened sort of outside the band, you know, while you're still working with Wayne Adams as producer, I feel like you're that much clearer about what you want to do as a band. So tell me about sort of putting these songs together and what your goals were for writing.
Scott, do you want to mean the songs start with Scott? So
Sure. I guess the biggest difference between writing Woodland Rights and writing Black Harvest was probably when we were writing Woodland Rights, we weren't writing, you know, the EP had, you know, people enjoyed it, it had done quite well, but there was still an element of like, how will this go down with what we wanted to do on Woodland Rights. And obviously the way we approach the songs and the arrangements and the productions owes a lot more to maybe bands like Queen and more bombastic pomp kind of classic rock than a lot of doom metal. And I think we were quite worried when we were doing Woodland Rights, is this going to alienate the more metal kind of people? Is having 6 tracks of harmonized vocals and that kind of thing, is that going to be a step too far towards that sound, compared to more ordinary, not ordinary, but more, you know, the core of the kind of stoner doom sound. And I think Woodland Rights being so enthusiastically embraced kind of empowered us a little bit. So it wasn't anymore or is this something we should do? Is this a step too far? It was now, oh, people enjoy this aspect of our sounds. We can play with that a lot more. And I think that, yeah, it really emboldened us in that kind of way. And so we've lent into that a little bit more. Yeah, so I'd say that's a big departure. We went into it wanting to embrace those more accessible and fun kind of sounds, while taking that heaviness. And yeah, that was kind of the mindset that we went into it. I think we had maybe a more cohesive vision of what we wanted to achieve on Black Harvest, rather than with Woodland Rights. It was kind of like, what if Brian May joined Black Sabbath? Whereas with Black Harvest, it was much more, what if evil Boston, you know?
I feel like that, that's a really good point, but also like when we wrote Woodland Rights, like Into the Wild was a song from the demo. We were originally writing a second EP, and then we realized we had more songs, and it wasn't like it ended up feeling really like a really cohesive album. Although, you know, to our ears, Into the Wild probably feels like an epilogue or something, because we knew it was an earlier song. Whereas with this one, it was all written. Scott finished writing the music, I'd say, towards the end of 2019. Maybe there was a couple of bits that got added last year, but most of it was written by Christmas the year before we recorded it. you know, and it took lots of shopping, and we worked on it throughout lockdown. But I do feel like it has more of, it's quite a distinctive album. It's like it was all written sort of at the same time. It's sort of a time and place.
Mhm.
And I think that's what's really satisfying about listening to it back, is it sort of, yeah, it, you know, we don't want to keep making the same album again and again. And I'm glad we kind of didn't try and do Woodland Rights 2 exactly, because I think that would have been a lot less interesting. But yeah, definitely, when I first heard some of Scott's demos, I was like, not that it was this sort of super over the top stuff, but I felt like, yeah, we knew what people liked about Green Lung, which is much better when you don't know.
Do you feel, I mean, I guess both of you, having gotten such a response from the EP and from the first record, I mean, did you feel pressured to sort of engage that audience, build on that? I mean, you know, as a course of being what you want to do, having fun with the songs,
Yeah,
great, right? When those things align, but I guess, was there, how much was audience consideration as you were putting the songs together? How would the songs be received live?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think, you know, most of the guys in Green Lung have been playing music and bands for a long time, and so it's something. It's kind of something you wrestle with. Are you writing music almost to a brief of the audience? Are you writing this music specifically for them, or are you writing it kind of for yourself? I think one thing I find quite helpful is to put trust in your own taste. As you know, we've put out Woodland Rights, people that like it. Let's not worry too much about making sure that we're giving those people what they like. Let's make sure that we're embracing what we like about our band and trusting that that is the same thing as what the audience likes. And I think there's a risk there, because sometimes there is going to be a disconnect. I mean, I remember seeing on Reddit lots of people who were into the kind of more stripped down, groovy stoner sound on not Lady Lucifer. What was Free the Witch? The EP. I remember seeing quite a few people that didn't really.
Oh, you cut out.
Scott, you cut out.
Oh,
Your
sorry.
mic.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think you're back. You were just breaking up a bit.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Welcome
Yeah,
back.
I was just saying. Hello. Yeah, so you naturally you will lose some people, but you'll gain other people. And it's just about kind of you and your taste, and thinking that your taste is something that the audience is gonna respond to.
Yeah, and on the lyrics side, it was like wanting to keep, you know, we sort of created this world over the course of that EP and LP, and I think it's this really English sort of folklore influenced, landscape influenced, nature influenced sort of vision of, you know, what our country is, in the same way that a lot of stoner rock, you know, in the States is like trades off its Americanness. And like, I wanted to try and keep obviously within that. You don't want to sort of break the spell, as it were, because you don't want to suddenly do a song about UFOs or hot rods. but I think, but I also don't.
I feel like that is the Americanness, right? That.
But I think like you also.
But anyway,
you don't want to do like 100 songs about dancing in the forest with Satan. You want to sort of explore. I mean, you could, and I'd be very happy to, but Scott probably would tell me off. But yeah, like I think I wanted to sort of widen the lens a bit about for the lyrics, and sort of bring in more contemporary sort of resonances, and just sort of run with that and see where it goes. I mean, I think Woodland Rights was this sort of springtime feeling album, and after we'd done it, we thought, okay, what if we did sort of 4 albums, each of which was based on a different season? And the Black Harvest feels like the sort of autumn harvest, sort of towards the end of the year album, versus Woodland Rights, which felt more springy. Cat mauling the thing. But yeah, like I really like the idea of the seasons being, you know, giving you a sort of different aspect of nature or whatever. And I think we've been talking a little bit about album 3, and there's some demos running around, and I like the idea of doing that in another sort of seasonal sort of theme. You know, I love like a good concept like that, like Baroness with their sort of different colors for each album, and it feels like something that suits what we do. I'm just gonna sort this cat out. Oh, he's gone. Was there anything else on that, Scott? Like, oh my god, the possessed beast.
Anything else on the cat? Ah, there you go. Poor cat. What's the cat's name?
Mervyn.
Hello, Mervyn. There you go.
You're evil. Yeah.
Tell me about specifics, contemporary ideas. You mentioned sort of working more, I guess, less classically English and more, presumably modernly English ideas.
It's sort of like looking to the past and looking to folklore and looking to the landscape of Britain and all of that stuff that we did on Woodland Rights. But I suppose thinking about it in a present day context, like, you know, Leaders of the Blind felt like a big sort of Sabbathy, more political song, I guess, about general leadership in this country and elsewhere. And, you know, even Born to a Dying World, the last song on the album, touches on climate change, but it's using the story of the Church of Dunwich on the east coast of England, which sort of fell under the waves, and you can still hear the bells supposedly underneath the waves. So it was like a nice little folk story, but it also has a little bit about, you know, where I grew up on the east coast, you lose so much of the ground every year to rising tides, and it seemed like a good way to sort of bring in, you know, a little bit more of a depth to the writing of the lyrics, rather than sort of go, you know, I think there's some songs on the album which are pure Hammer horror, like Upon the Altar is literally quoting from a Hammer horror movie, like throughout in the lyrics. And I just don't want the band to sort of just sit on its laurels and do one thing. I think it's more interesting if we sort of explore the folklore and tie it to whatever our current concerns are.
Hammer horror will always be there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not going anywhere. You mentioned recording at the end of 2019, putting out the record at back half of 2021, and you were in the studio for about 2 weeks. So as a band, not being able to play live in the interim because of a fucking pandemic, yeah. How do you sit on those songs and not lose your minds?
That's an interesting one.
I think you do, really.
What's that, Scott?
Oh, sorry. I don't think you do, really. I think in one way it's a blessing, because a surefire way to, I guess, become bored of those songs is to play it live lots. So it's nice that that pandemic did happen, which meant that although we've had those songs in the locker for a very long time, they still kind of feel new to us because they're still new to everyone else. I think the biggest danger you run into when you've got a lot of time to fill in writing is overcooking and overcooking songs. I think the songs in Black Harvest definitely got to a point where we had overthought everything. Everything was being far too dense. And so we really had to go back and kind of rearrange everything, especially considering there's a lot more going on now. There's a lot more, the keyboards, the organs and everything are much more integrated into the sound. Everything the backing vocals are doing is, you know, much more musical and much more an integral part of the sound than anything we're doing on Woodland Rights. And when you've got all these disparate threads going on musically, you need to be very careful with the arrangements to make sure that they all have their own space, that they're all working in tandem together, and that they're all serving, you know, the top line, the melody and the hooks, the vocal hooks. So I think it was a blessing in some ways that we had that time to go away and think about the arrangements and that kind of thing. But it was also a bit of a curse because having that amount of time forced upon us, you know, made us overthink things that we shouldn't have overthought. But it all came out very well, and it was a interesting way to write collectively, because instead of being in a room together and working things out together, you're just trading stems and home recordings, which is, in some ways, it's nice because you get a clarity and a time to think and ruminate on your parts that you wouldn't necessarily have when you're all in a room together, which I personally quite like. But obviously, you'll always miss the chemistry of being in the same room together.
So it's a bit of a trade-off then, right? I mean, you get that, you know, sometimes I feel like if everyone's in the room together, you get an immediate response, but the immediate response is not always what you want to say, right?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely felt like, I mean, Scott basically, you know, like maybe like midsummer 2020, you know, maybe we're like 4 months out from recording the album, did a big sort of back a lot of, like, you know, if there was like a over silly synth part, which we just put in because we'd been fucking around at home, you know, a lot of that stuff just got whittled down. So it was almost like, with Woodland Rights, we recorded it in 4 days, most of the instrumentals. You know, the songs were written really quickly, and there wasn't really a point where we could have. We were just rattling along trying to get that album in the pocket, and we didn't really have the chance to sort of properly, you know, workshop it. So it was sort of, I think Scott and I both love concision and like look up to bands like, I don't know, Power Trip, where it's like, here are 8 fucking great songs in 32 minutes and it feels like a massive album. But I think both Woodland Rights and Black House like around 40 minutes, which is probably a little short for a doom band, but it's basically because we just try and cut as much, we try and edit as much as we can and really tighten those songs. The songs have gone from the demo from being like 6-8 minutes to like trying to get all of that in to 4 minutes and make it really, 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 like, every second counts, which is probably not what most stoner bands are doing, because everyone loves to, you know, in this genre, I think loads of bands love to jam, love to like build atmospherically. So I think that's why we stick out a bit, actually. It's sort of trying to make things really like almost punky, like real like quick, tight songs.
That's straightforward structure. You get a lot of bands who ride the groove for I don't know, 9 or 10 minutes.
And that's great. And that's
yeah, no, I'm not, dude, I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking it. But no, I agree. I think you guys go the other way. It's interesting to think about that editorial process of going through and cutting out. Scott, can you talk a little bit about what came out of the songs and that process of tightening them up like that?
Yeah, I think sorry, my brain is still completely frazzled from
Bloodstock,
from going crazy at Bloodstock. Let me collect my thoughts. I think in terms of song structures, so in terms of actually writing the songs and that kind of thing, I think what's really interesting to look at in doom metal and the more extreme kind of ends of that genre, bands like Mirror Reaper and that kind of thing, is moved completely away from traditional kind of metal and rock song structures. It's more like electronic music or atmospheric music in a lot of ways, where it's about creating, you know, a motif, an idea, and then developing it and developing it and developing it. I think obviously Dope Smoker by Sleep is probably the best example of that kind of thing, and it's all I love listening to it. It'd be cool to do a band like that maybe one day, but I think something that happens when, you know, you're sat at a doom all day in the Black Heart in Camden, and the 5th consecutive band plays the 5th consecutive 20-minute long Odyssey song, is, as someone who grew up on Bad Brains and hardcore punk and good pop music and that kind of thing, you really value the momentum that shorter songs have. So it's not about developing those motifs and things. It's about making sure that the verse serves the pre-chorus, which serves the purpose. And it's all about delivering hooks, delivering memorable moments, and making sure that each moment feeds into the next in a way that builds the whole song together. And so I think it kind of happens naturally in Green Lung, because one of the main priorities is to make songs that are memorable and songs that are hooky. And so we kind of write backwards in a way. Often a lot of the songs will have been written with perhaps a chorus vocal melody in mind, and we'll develop the chorus around that and then develop everything down. So it's almost like a pyramid, I guess, with the chorus at the top, making sure everything else is serving that purpose and making sure it builds to something. And I mean, I'm just an absolute, I adore Brian Wilson, for example, and those kind of songwriters. And so I think the way they approach structuring music is something that I take a lot of influence and inspiration from, and it's something that I always feel very inspired by, and that's something I wanted to kind of introduce to Green Lung. Partly because, yeah, as I said, I grew up listening to 3-minute punk and hardcore songs, and partly just because I thought it would be a bit something that's quite refreshing in the genre. In terms of what got cut that you were asking about, it was much more around arrangements. I think we've got very good players in Green Lung. John is a really good keys player. Wiseman's become great at drums. And Joe, our new bassist, he's a professional jazz musician, so he's very adept musically. And I think one thing that happens when you've got a bunch of dudes that mechanically very good and can play very well is sometimes everyone's playing very well at the same time. And so what you want to do is make sure that everyone has their kind of moment to shine and everything. You want to make sure that focus is moving around the different members of the band. So when Wiseman does a good drum fill, I think something we probably were guilty of a little bit in Woodland Rights is I'd be thinking, oh, what should I do on guitar here? And Kay would be doing a cool bass fill. And I think it doesn't necessarily aggregate that well. You want to make sure that when Wiseman does a really cool drum fill, maybe everything else steps back. When John has a lead, something, you want to make sure everything else is in service at the moment. So that was what went into the arrangement behind it and the kind of things that got cut.
Okay, take me from that to you've done the recording and now you're mixing, right? You mentioned Brian Wilson as an influence. Well, there's someone who took 40 years to put out a record, right? So, yeah. Right, like take me through not only arranging the songs, but arranging the balance of the actual levels of highlighting a drum or a bass fill or a guitar lead or a vocal part.
Well, funny enough, that was kind of why the arrangements are so popular. Important. Sorry, I'm running on like 40%. I think I'm gonna have to mainline a couple of espressos after this. The reason the arrangement is so popular, you see it most clearly with the organ. So obviously with any keys instrument, any kind of sound, you're dealing with 4 or 5 octaves of sound. You're dealing with a huge range. And so especially something as ear catching as an overdriven organ sound that we use very heavily, that's going to be interfering in the mid-range of the guitar. The low end is going to be interfering with the bass. Obviously the way, if anyone plays piano, you'll know, but you're going to be using inversions a lot of the time. So the lowest note you're playing won't necessarily be the root note, might be the 3rd or the 5th, something like that, which can start to interfere with heavily overdriven guitars, heavily distorted guitars, very loud bass. And so we kind of arrange the songs in service of the mixing. So the songs kind of mix themselves. If we had, let's take Leaders of the Blind, for example. So it comes in, big loud organ, the organ's driving everything in the verses, and then steps back for the choruses, steps back for the guitar lines and those kind of things. So we make sure that when the organ is going to be the main instrument, the organ's the main instrument, and everything else is falling back. You can make sure that in the way you're playing, for example, palm muting, you're bringing down the mid-range of the guitar to give room for the organ to kind of bloom and fill that kind of space. So I think mixing it would have been it would have been very, very difficult. And it was one of Wayne's biggest, when we were in the first couple of days when we were recording and we're dialing in the kind of organ sounds, Wayne being very concerned that, you know, this is going to be a very difficult thing to mix. And so that's why we put so much effort before we even stepped into the studio and making sure that even with half the time to mix the record that we had, it would still be coherent. It would still kind of mix itself, which is also very important because live, you're not going to have that. You know, obviously we can raise and lower levels of volume and that kind of thing, but you're not going to have the same attention to detail that you would have on mixing a record. And so we wanted to make sure that not only would this make sense in a carefully mixed record, but it also needs to make sense live when everything's loud and everyone's going for it. So yeah, the arrangement was definitely done. It was almost like mixing as you go. So the songs kind of mix themselves by virtue of how we play them. But yeah, mixing, I think Wayne's probably still got some residual PTSD from it. I think we broke a new record, personal record of I think it was 20 guitar parts happening simultaneously in a couple of those Brian May moments, which is obviously a nightmare to record for Paul Wayne. I don't think he ever started crying, but there was a couple of points when he came pretty close and I was like, no, another track, Wayne.
He loves it though. He loves it. And he likes the challenge because he remixed Free the Witch when it was a much more like simple, like groovy sort of thing. So he's sort of come with us, and it's really funny thinking about our first encounter with Wayne, where he was basically like recording us in like over 2 days, really quick, like one take only, telling Scott not to play pinch harmonics, telling us we were shit and that we all needed to learn to play better. And up to Black Harvest, where he was sort of like, you know, he'd taken us out to this residential studio and was sort of thinking he was Martin Birch, basically, which has been fun. Especially because he's like he mostly records like noise rock and punk. So suddenly asking him to do like a big classic rock sort of production job is like, I think, a big holiday for him.
Not 20 guitar tracks on a song. Got it.
Yeah, putting an iPhone in a bin or something.
Tell me about putting together Born to a Dying World. You mentioned it earlier.
That's a really interesting one.
Yeah, that was
Scott sent around that demo, and it was like this really bluesy. I mean, inspiration wise, Scott, what that was close to, because it's got like a gospel-y feel for me.
Yeah, the chord progression is like a classically something you find in a lot of old gospel music and that kind of thing. It used to have, once again it got cut quite heavily, but it used to have an intro that would sort of start in major key and then modulate down to a minor version of that, which is like classic gospel trick. And I think we just wanted to do something that, obviously so much of this kind of metal and stoner metal and that kind of thing is very blues indebted. I mean, Sabbath themselves always talk about how they're just a heavy blues band and that kind of thing. And I thought it'd be quite interesting to maybe bring in related kind of influences. So yeah, that's where it all kind of started from. We took the kind of tropes and musical ideas you find in a lot of early gospel music and used that to build all the underlying music. That was very challenging to do from a production sense of perspective. You talk about that.
The most interesting, like I remember I was just singing away at home that chorus, and then realized that it would fit that song. And that's why it's quite a weird chorus for that song. It shouldn't work, but it kind of does. And for me, when I wrote that vocal melody and lyrics, it didn't feel particularly Green Lung, and it felt more and more as we played it as a band, and it all started to gel. And I think it's a great end song for me, because I think it's again a bit like Into the Wild, slightly separate, slightly like a good way to, if you put it in the middle of the album, it might feel more of a sort of intrusion. And it has this bleakness that's quite, and like sadness that's kind of like an interesting note to end on. And yeah, when we recorded it, I remember like Wayne was like really like finding it difficult to sort of see it within the other tracks. And we talked about White a Shade of Pale actually as like a comparison, weirdly. I don't think it sounds anything like that, but like in terms of that sort of psyched out organ driven thing, and we ended up stripping out the drums a lot. There was originally like he was playing the kit the whole way through. We took it right back out of the first verse. Scott was playing guitar on the first verse, that got taken out. So it's kind of like what Scott was saying about, you know, realizing that actually the funny thing about Joe as an organist is we wrote Woodland Rights as a 4-piece. We put in a bunch of organ parts, and then when we'd done it, we were like, fuck, we need to hire an organist because you know it's just happened. And so he wasn't there on, you know, those parts were written by Scott on the first album completely. And I think the big growing process in the second album has been like, okay, we've got more ammo, we've got more in our arsenal. And when do we use it the best? When is this just a stripped down guitar song with very little organ? When is this something that the organ can sort of really like take us into ballad territory or something, or take us into sort of, you know, big gothic territory? You know, where do we use it? And Graveyard Sun and Born to a Dying World for me both couldn't have been written by the 4-piece who did Woodland Rights, because we just didn't have that sort of firepower. But I remember, like, you know, two mixers in, we went back in and re-recorded some percussion for Born to a Dying World, and then it just sort of clicked.
Yeah, we did all of the because as Tom, what are they called? Proto Karam? What's the guys that did White a Shade of Pale?
Yeah,
that's it. That was very much the comp for the organ sound, and it lacked something. I don't think it was like a percussive enough sound. So what we actually went and did is we recorded a bunch of like a classic Rhodes electric piano sound over it, and that's actually the dominant kind of key sound and the kind of heart of the song. I think we were reticent to go ballady on it, and I think because of that we kind of got confused a little bit in how to actually produce it, and then we went back and introduced those kind of gospelly more
You cut out that last part again, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think he was just saying that, you know.
Just talking about how we went back and
sorry, Scott.
Technical difficulties. So you've started work on album 3, at least sort of preliminary demos. Where's album 3 going?
Getting ahead of ourselves there. I mean,
right, it's the 2 months with the acknowledgement that we're 2 months away from releasing album 2.
Yeah.
Right. With that disclaimer, that said, where's album 3 going?
I'll be, you know, I think we can be cagey about it, but I will say that I think it's a lot more freeing to have done album 2, because we, you know, Woodland Rights came out, it was like a sort of cult hit. It exceeded our wildest expectations. It really did. And doing a follow-up to that was in a pandemic when we lost a band member and gained a band member, and all of that was it was a kind of an interesting process, and it made us a lot stronger as a band, I think. But I think with album 3, you can kind of exceed people's expectations. I think you're freer to sort of take risks and do something that, like, we know what Green Lung is now so much better than we did at the beginning of either of those last 2 albums, really. And it's, like I said about the scope of the sort of musical firepower, but also the sort of, you know, we're all 4 years older than when we sort of started the band. We all understand, not only as musicians, how to play and sing and produce better, but we also understand what Green Lung is on a really core level. And I just want to sort of you know, make, as we always do every time we make an album, we want to make the best Green album we can. And I'm just really excited because I think it's going to be I want to make a big blockbuster rock album that just sort of achieves that more than ever. You know, I think album 1 was like, here we are. Album 2 was like, we can do a lot of different things, and there's more to us than just the sort of Sabbathy riffs. And hopefully on the third one we can continue that. But I also would say it's not going to be some sort of massive prog concept album. I want to try and make the tightest, most punchy, like the Master of Reality. You know, Master of Reality is like 35 minutes long. I wonder if we could make an album that's like that. That's just a classic, but is just every single song is just bam. It's a tough one, but we'll try.
The heck of a goal. Yeah. Scott, any thoughts? New material?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff just bubbling away. What I quite enjoy is I'm just looking forward to, I'm kind of intentionally not thinking that much about album 3 because I think
it's legit.
You know, it's going to be
that's
I'm just
fair.
going to enjoy these songs. It's also it's sometimes difficult because I think everyone's like this, where the music you listen to, you know, wanders about loads, right? And I always feel it's helpful to write Green Lung stuff when I'm going through a you know, like a hard rock listening phase. But you know, that magpie element where you're just attracted to different kind of shiny music all the time can make it kind of difficult and mean that your focus is spread across lots of different kind of genres and ideas. And so I'm quite enjoying almost having a bit of a break from hard guitar music, you know. And I'm very much looking forward to more refreshed for album 3.
And in the meantime, you have these songs to play live, right? Which is, you know, how did you feel debuting new material at Bloodstock? Right. I mean,
it was kind of interesting because obviously we'd had a good response to those first 2 singles. I think, you know, we were really, really pleased that people sort of, I think, you know, we were worried that, you know, with, even if it's just from our own internal perspective, like the more you develop the music, the more you layer it up and stuff, you know, there's always going to be people being like, you know, Woodland Rights, or like, there's people who genuinely like, they sold out after Free the Witch. I've seen that comment before, which makes me laugh a lot. But like, so you never know. But those songs had already been out for like a month or so, and I feel like they've been getting a really great reaction. So it wasn't necessarily the songs themselves, it's just how they fit in the set. It's like, you know, does it all feel like it coheres together, and that all of these songs are the same band? And one thing I think that's been interesting is like, in the rehearsals for Bloodstock and for these upcoming gigs, we've been putting in some like moments on the older songs, like extra keyboard parts or little moments that sort of make them pop, that I think are the kind of thing we've been doing on the songs in Black Harvest. So it's not necessarily the new songs that stand out, it's that they sort of make us go and look back at the old songs and sort of polish them up a bit live as well, which is really fun and makes you sort of enjoy them all over again, because it's not like we're going to go and be Bob Dylan and sort of completely reinterpret the song every time we play it live. But I think it's cool to sort of, you know, chuck in a little part here, or you know, tweak that a little bit and keep the songs alive. Because as a musician, you don't want to completely sort of stick it all in aspect and just play that thing the same way every time. So I just felt like the whole set was like really one piece. It never felt like, you know, and that's, you know, with this band, we hadn't got to that point of having like, shit, we need to drop like some songs that people really like. And like, how do you navigate that set list? And it's sort of a slow process, working out what is the, you know, we think these are the singles. It'll be a totally different thing once the album's actually out as to what people, you know, you can see now on Spotify and all sorts of places what are your most listened to songs, and sometimes it surprises you.
I get that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Now the immediacy of the feedback is interesting. You know, you talk about a song being out for a month before you play it live for sort of the first time in front of this massive audience, and the album is months out, and this thinking of the song as like kind of old news, right? Like it's it's a brave new world. Although not even that new at this point. I'm just fucking old. All right. Thank you guys. I think we're gonna leave it on that note, and say congratulations on your second album. It's called Black Harvest. It's quite good. You made a very good record, and I hope you're proud of it. Real quick, Wayne Adams as producer. After doing Free the Witch, and having Wayne Adams tell you sucked and learn how to play and all that stuff, what made you go back? And would you ever work with anyone else?
I don't know. I mean, we recorded a Sabbath cover with a different producer who's also great. But Wayne, I remember like the second night we'd been recording Free the Witch, we all went to the pub and we were all just super dejected because Wayne had been like, why haven't you thought of this? Like, why, you know, this doesn't sound like the kind of thing you're trying to do. You know, he'd really like, the guy is a total cunt, and he will just say what he thinks. You paid him, but he will tell you what he thinks. And that's like, what more do you want in a producer? I think that there's sometimes Wayne will lean in too far, and I'll totally disagree on a fundamental level with something, but it's kind of rare actually. He's usually right more often than not. And I think in today's world in music, there are a lot of yes men, there are a lot of sort of PR people, there are a lot of just sort of shiny sort of people who are basically just on Instagram or whatever, sort of constantly trying to find work and just basically being sort of pleasing people. And Wayne is someone he's like Steve Albini of sort of East London. He's a total like psycho who knows exactly what he likes. He won't work with you really if he doesn't like what you're doing. He's saying, well, you know, it's more like, why did he come and work with us again? More than why did we go back to him? And it's just been really funny, our relationship, because it started off fairly antagonistically in some ways, and then has ended up where he's like almost like a part of the band in some ways. So yeah, I think having a producer who, I also think like, if the producer was trying to be Martin Birch and wasn't some weird punk guy who plays Gabba records and, you know, loves making a hideous noise, I think Green Lung would sound too shiny and polished. I think like it needs grit and dirt and weirdness and heaviness and like all of that stuff, because otherwise we could, if you overproduced us and pushed us into one direction, we could end up sounding like it's like a hard rock band. And I think that would be a lot more boring than where we've ended up. We were sort of doomy underground guys wanting to do something melodic and catchy and hard rocky, and sort of getting it wrong. But I think the getting it wrong slightly is the part that makes it interesting. And for me, that's a reason to go with Wayne every time, because he's also he gets that. He's never going to sort of shear off the rough edges, I think. But you never know. Like, I think trying to sort of factor in the future, like, you know, trying to do a record every couple of years would be a really great thing for us, I think. But you just never know. You don't know where life's taking you. So it's sort of every record as it comes.
Yeah, no, sometimes you have to sit on your ass for a year and a half before you go record. Yeah, no, legit.
Pandemic.
Yeah, sometimes apparently that happens sometimes. Scott, I'm going to give you last word.
Oh man, I'm a husk. I'm a shell of a man, a broken shell of a man.
And that's the last word.
Last word.
That's it. Scott Black, Tom Templar of Green Lung. Thank you guys. I'm going to stop the recording. Don't sign out yet, whatever. But thank you guys again, and congratulations on the record. I look forward to the release, and someday being in a room
Yeah, that'd be nice.
with a stage, maybe about yay high, and you guys are playing music on that stage while I am standing there watching and listening. So someday, all right, someday. Thank you guys. Gonna stop recording. Here we go.